So much of our lives are measured by times and seasons. And it really is man that was placed in time rather than time that was placed in man. That may sound a little, deep thinking. I don't know. We'll figure that out as we go along. But Ecclesiastes 3 has many verses that get quoted in life and in church. Yet much of the writing leads to the conclusion that all in this life is futile. Have you ever felt like, what's the point? Time and season measure duration of something, right? That's what they measure. They don't measure success or failure. We sometimes assign them such values. They can say, well, you know, Bob worked here for 25 years. Let's give him a gold watch. And maybe he did a good job for 25 years. Maybe he just showed up. Maybe he was a pain in the derriere. We don't know, right? It just tells us about the duration of his time there. It doesn't tell us a whole lot more. And things change during our lives that can affect the meaning of even how we describe those things. So, for instance, I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. If I didn't, I at least thought it. Era. We use that word way differently than we ever did before in the very recent last couple of years. The era, right? Well, it's the end. It's the end of an era. It's the end of the Josh McCown era with the Raiders. Well, he was the coach there for a year. That's not an era. It's a mistake, right? I mean, just candidly, right? you know, um, an era. At least I think this was the definition. Carolyn, you're gonna have to help me with this. But when I was growing up, I thought an era was at least a decade, right? A year? No, that's like I said, that's a mistake. That's all it is, right? There's no era about it. And career, you know, his career as the head coach. Well, his career as a head coach is 1 year and 1 year, and both were disasters, right? I'm not trying to pick on him today. It's just an easy example, right? Um, but it's hard to call that a career, right? I mean, again, it was more of two mistakes, right? um, so success we don't really measure by time. I mean, I guess if you're racing or something, you could measure it by time, right? But success we measure generally by much different scales, much different standards. And the success at what? Right? I mean, wow, he was a really great politician. I mean, really? I don't want to pick on politicians too much, but they go around talking about how important they are and how you need them to do stuff. And as far as I can tell, that doesn't require any actual job skills, you know. Um, but that's a whole nother topic. So we look at what are we measuring when we talk about success? Is it relationships? Is it being a Christian example? I mean, as Christians, how should we measure success? Well, okay. That's a very valid point, Randy. I mean, we make it to heaven. We're supposed to be spreading the good news, right? Our testimony. Those are the things we're supposed to be doing. And how long does it last? How long does success last? Right? I mean, Sandy Koufax was a pretty good pitcher. but he had a fairly short career, right? A pitcher goes out and throws a perfect game. Perfect. Right? 27 up, 27 down. Nobody gets on base. Nobody on the team makes an error. Right? You could be a pitcher and throw a perfect game, but someone on your team can make an error, and that's the end of your perfect game, right? And so you say, wow, that's amazing. One of only however many pitchers, and it's not very many, have ever thrown a perfect game. And then about 4 days later, you go out and you got to do it again. They don't throw perfect games back to back, right? You might even get shelled, right? And then it's, well, what have you done for me lately, right? Does that make sense? And so Ecclesiastes 3, Solomon's kind of ends up with, it's all vanity. None of this matters. And the verse that I want to look at here in chapter 3 says, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear, a time to tear and a time to mend or tear and mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And then he says, what do people really get for all their hard work? I have seen the burden God has placed on us all, yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart, but even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from the beginning to end. And that right there is part of the reason why I said so much of our lives are measured by times and seasons, and it really is man that was placed in time rather than time that was placed in man, because we have God in us, and he's timeless. So it's not time that's placed in us, it's timelessness that's placed in us. And it says, so I concluded there is nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. That's what his conclusion was. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. And I know that whatever God does is final. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God's purpose is that people should fear him. What is happening now has happened before, and what will happen in the future has happened before, because God makes the same things happen over and over again. And and like I said, I don't know if this is going to be a little too philosophical for some today or not, or if my wife's going to be frustrated with me, like going, what's your point? But but I want to kind of lay this out. When I read Ecclesiastes 3, the very first thing I get is, how depressing is that? Right? I mean, here's this guy, and he's just saying it's all worthless. None of it means anything. It doesn't matter what you do. There's things that happen at different times, and they just happen. And on top of that, nothing really matters. And God's going to do what God's going to do, and you should just enjoy the moment and be done with it. And to me, that's depressing. I mean, just candidly. I mean, all right? So it comes down to the measure of a life. The measure of a life. There's the eternal. See, we were created, and placed in us is a piece of the God of creation. That's what we're here for. That's what is inside us. That's what makes our heart beat. The God of creation. And it comes down to impacts, because it goes on later, and different verse. In Corinthians, it talks about 1 Corinthians. It talks about what is done for God is what will last. The impact of a life is what is done for God. Well, you can say, Joseph Stalin had an impact on the world. Wasn't a good one, but he had one. But is there any value to it? Is there any value to that impact? Yeah. There really isn't any good. I wouldn't want that on my resume, particularly when I got to heaven, right? What is done for God? Think of Billy Graham. I'd like to have that on my resume, right? I'm doing a lot of sports analogy, but Nolan Ryan was a very good pitcher. Didn't throw a perfect game, but he was a very good pitcher. Pitched for a long time. And what is his impact on the world? We would say he was very successful. He made a lot of money. But what was his impact on the world? See, there's the now. We have now. That's what we have. We have now. And we have what we think about now. I'm going to explain that in a second. But we have now. Pastor Steve has talked a number of times about now. That was then, and this is now. And that's what we have. We have now. We have the breath that you're breathing now, which is a gift from God that he holds in his hand. And we have what we think about now. If you think now is bad, it is. And if you think now is good, it is, to your way of thinking. Right? Because here's the reality. You cannot control time. We talk about things like time management. You can't manage time. You can manage you in the now, but you cannot manage time. You cannot say, the 57th minute of this hour needs to be moved into the next hour at the 6th minute. That would be managing time, wouldn't it? There is an example in the Bible of someone stopping the sun, right? I don't know if you've ever studied any of this, and it's a little nerdy, but things like Star Trek, right? They talk about, this is 13 light years away, and then they go zinging over there in about 3 minutes on your TV. And but see, if you were to leave Earth traveling at the speed of light, how fast would time be advancing? How many breaths would you take in say, an hour of traveling at the speed of light? Because time would basically be at zero if you're moving at the speed of light. And if you left here at the speed of light and traveled out of our galaxy and then turned around and came back at the speed of light to Earth, how long were you gone? And the reality is, for you, traveling at the speed of light, you would have been gone approximately 1 day. Okay? How long would you have been gone here on Earth? And the answer is somewhere around 1 million years. Man, was not placed in time so that we could measure all of our successes by that time. Time is a construct of God that we work with, but what's placed inside us is eternal. Now I'm done being all philosophical, okay? Am I okay, sweetheart? Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not in trouble here. Okay. Changing with the times. What? We need to take a deep dive into the mind of man. Because the reality is how you do things, how you live your life is largely impacted by what you think. And the problem we have is what we think doesn't always line up with what God said. We think I'm a failure. And God says I'm a child of the King. We think that it's hopeless. And God says I am your hope. And we think that it's over. And God says we've only just begun. So what we think matters in how we deal with our now. I don't know about you, but have you ever let your attitude affect your now? So I'm not the only one? Okay, I'm just checking. The Bible says, and this is the why, the Bible says, as a man thinks, so shall he be. You can go look it up. That's what it says. What you think matters. And where does the enemy attack you? In your thinking. Starts by making you think you can control time. Starts to make you think that your success is measured in time. Starts to make you think that your existence is measured in time. And none of that is true. Your existence is measured by existence. What do I mean by that? God is existence. You're judged by God, and you've fallen short. But he gave you an out for falling short, and that he paid the price. So when do I need to change with the times? And the answer is right now. Do it today. Right this second. Fix your attitude right now. Fix your heart right now. Fix your trying to control things right now. Fix your right now and give it to God. God, I give you my right now, because that's all I have. We like to say things like, well, it costs you everything to follow God. Yes, it does, but you don't have much. Right? You got right now. That's it. Hey, God, I bring you. I got nothing. Right? I bring you my nothing. What can you do with that? Yeah. He says, how about I just take care of eternity for you? Right? We get worked up and we get out of sorts over time. Wow, you don't understand. I was hurt in my past. Are you living in your past? It's not possible. You can only be dead in your past because it's gone. Well, I just don't understand how I'm going to deal with this in the future. Really? Are you living in your future? Because you haven't got there yet. And you have no idea if you're gonna. Right? I watched a lot of cartoons when I was a kid. And I saw that coyote have all kinds of plans, but they very seldom became his future. Generally, right when he thought he had his future all figured out, a bus ran him over or something. Right? Might be good to have the eternal part taken care of. What is it you want to be upset about? What is it you want to be hurt by? What is it you want to be unforgiving about? What is it you want to be influenced by? The enemy keeps trying to tell you about today and yesterday and tomorrow. And God says, come to me, and I'll give you rest, and I'll restore your soul. I'll give you peace. I'll be right here with you. I won't leave you or forsake you. And I'll provide everything you need right now. Does that make sense? We can make a commitment. We can pray this prayer. Father God, I give you my time for you to use and direct for your glory. I ask you to let me see the value in the moments each day and not the problems or the futility of my striving to direct what isn't mine to control. I just give it to you, God. And if I do that, I can stop worrying. I can stop striving. I can just give it to God. And here's the thing, because, I don't want to give the wrong impression on part of this, and that is, I believe that we should give God our best effort in all that we do. It says, what your hand finds to do with your might. Meaning, do to the best of your abilities. So when you go to work, I don't think it's okay to just tell your employer, well, que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. The future's not mine, I'm just here, you give me my paycheck and I'll show up maybe. I don't think that's the right attitude. But if I do what I do with all my might, giving it to God, I can have rest in what I do. And if I give it to God, He will use it for His glory. And it'll have an impact for His glory. And that'll be an impact way bigger than a pitcher who has a long career or throws a perfect game, or a football coach that's not very good, or a world leader that's awful. There was one minister who gave his best one day when he didn't really want to, spoke a message to a basically empty room, and only had one person who really paid attention and one convert that day. And that was Billy Graham. The convert, I mean. What was the impact of his right now? It was life-changing worldwide. Because he simply gave it to God. And let God multiply it. Let God direct it. Let God use it. Because, see, He can take a few little fishes and feed thousands. So you can get the glory? No. So He can get the glory for His purposes. And we told you a few years ago, we went down and did a service down at a little church, and they were doing a potluck, and they had a way better turnout than they expected. And I was standing on the stage, because I'd been ministering. I was standing on the stage, and they brought these tables forward, and they put all this food out on the tables. And the pastor was standing up next to me, and I was standing there, and I was standing watching as people came forward and dished their plates. And there was way more people than there was food. Now, I didn't stand there and pray, God, do a miracle. I was just standing there kind of observing, occasionally saying hello to somebody, whatever. And I watched as they came up and they scooped these, they were enchiladas, yes. They scooped these enchiladas out of this foil pan and scooped them onto their plate. And I stood there and I watched scoop, 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 scoop. And the plate was about 3/4 full. Scoop, scoop, scoop. And the plate was about 3/4 full. Scoop, scoop, scoop. And it was about 3/4 full. And I looked over at the pastor and I said, are you seeing this? And he goes, I am blown away. God can take whatever you bring him and he can turn it into something important. And I'll tell you this, if you will give God your today, if you'll give God your right now, he will do great things with it. And you won't ever have to worry about the impact or the legacy or your reputation or anything in life. God will use it for his glory. He'll get the glory. And you can have the peace that comes from doing what God has called you to do. Stop striving against time. And that's it for this week.